Hello, my name is James Arroyo, and welcome to Chapter 8, Defective Decision Making and Problem Solving. Problem solving and decision making seems like common sense, but as we continue to learn, communication seems like it's common sense. But there are a lot of intricacies and challenges that continue to pop up and things that studies have shown we continually fall into these traps. So, decision making is very similar to this, and we tend to fall into some of the same defective decision making challenges. And by learning more about them, we will be less likely to fall for them. We're going to go ahead and dive right into what we should strive for, which is critical thinking. Critical thinking requires group members to analyze and evaluate ideas and information to reach sound judgments and conclusions based off of high quality reasoning and credible evidence. Let's break this down a little bit. First, requires group members to analyze and evaluate ideas. That we have to be sure that we not only get this information and then evaluate it, which sometimes we don't do. Then, based off of high quality reasoning, so drawing conclusions in the right way, and credible evidence. And if even one of these is faulty, then we can very easily fall into incorrect perceptions and assumptions and solutions. One of the biggest challenges of this is information overload. Information overload occurs when the rate of information flow into a system and or complexity of that information is too much. This is very much likened to trying to drink from a fire hydrant. That it is impossible because there's just too much coming at us. So think to your previous math class when you had a situation where all the information was so complex and it was hard to really process, and therefore there was too much information for us. On the flip side, there's also the rate of information flow. Does anyone have a workplace email, which would then where you receive 200, 300, maybe even 400 emails in a week, maybe even a few days. So information overload is a big challenge. The scope of the problem is just that it is an incredibly common problem with due to too much openness in the system, that there's far too much input, and as a result, the system suffers as a result. Now we move on to the consequences and copings of information overload. We start with the consequences, or the downside of information. Critical thinking impairment is gathering vast quantities of information, which can increase our confidence in decisions, but then decrease the accuracy of those decisions. This leads to the age-old riddle of, so imagine you're a bus driver, and 6 people jump on your bus, 5 people jump off. 8 people jump on, 2 people jump off, 8 people jump on again, and 3 people jump off, then 9 people jump off, and then 3 people jump back on. How many people are still on the, no. Also, Steve is to your back right, and then Susan is to your back left. What's the name of the bus driver? Due to all of the information that I've provided you, it may be harder to discern who the name of the bus driver was because it was you. You were the bus driver. So, this can also lead to one of the other consequences of information, of too much information, is indecisiveness. That we tend to have a need and expectation for speed, because since we get so much information, then we have to deal with this information a lot more. This is one of the big downsides to technology. We are constantly inundated with information, and because of that, we are less decisive about what choices we should make, because if we have all this information, we have to be able to analyze all of it. But that's not really the case and not something that we should try to do. Also, inattention, difficulty concentrating. Have you ever been talking to someone and chatting, and then all of a sudden you feel your phone vibrate, and you're like trying to pay attention, but it's a little bit more difficult to concentrate. That is very much another downside of this information overload. And lastly, creativity or diminished creativity. When we have too much information coming to us, then we we don't creatively think and analyze. Instead, we are just simply process, send out. That's why a lot of highly innovative and successful people think to the benefit of shower thoughts. Those thoughts that you're thinking in the shower that once you are out, you can't bring your phone into the shower. You can't bring any other work into the shower. So it's just now you're thinking about random stuff. That is what improves creativity. And how do we cope? Well, first, screen information. Separating out knowing what is useful and what is useless information will help us better improve our coping with information overload. Shutting down technology is hitting the off switch. In other words, this could be either literally turning off your phone or figuratively putting it away so that you are not dealing with technology. This is very much where we talk to the shower thoughts. Also, becoming selective on getting only being selective of what information you send out, so that information is given on a need to know basis so that people are not inundated by information that is not need to know. Then we also have limiting the search, knowing that when enough is enough information. Again, we tend to feel more confident with more information, but it tends to actually sometimes diminish the solutions. So we have to know when to stop when we have enough information so that we have time to analyze. This is also a big benefit of having extended deadlines, or not extended deadlines, but starting early so that you're able to analyze your thoughts. And then discerning patterns, recognizing irrelevant information. If Steve every Friday or Saturday sends you an email that really doesn't have anything to do with anything, then you may discern a pattern of recognizing that that may be irrelevant information. And then lastly, focus. And this one's simple. Just focus on one thing at a time. Multitasking, there has been study after study after study saying that multitasking makes us do worse at both tasks, and it takes longer than doing one task than another. So we really want to be sure that we are coping with information overload. None of these is just to just remove ourselves from technology. While shutting down can sometimes be effective, it is something to keep in mind that we can't put the technological genie back in the bottle. We can't just, remove ourselves from the situation. Information overload is going to occur. It is going to happen. But we can do many things to cope with this information overload. The next thing is information underload, and this isn't as common, but this refers to the insufficient amount of information, inadequate input available to a group for decision-making purposes. This tends not to be as common. Unshared information in a group leads to poor quality decision making, and this tends to be where this happens most often. When group members feel somehow intimidated and unwilling or unable to share the information that they have, then that can lead to information underload. The principal solution to this problem is greater openness in lines of communication, that we diminish hierarchical structures, we validate and try to make people feel more comfortable in sharing information. Next, we talk to mindsets, and this makes critical thinking frozen. A perceptual mindset is a psychological cognitive predisposition to see the world in a particular way. And when there are things that run counter to that, then we end up not seeing that information. We have confirmation bias and fake dichotomies. These tend to be the two most common of these mindsets that freeze our critical thinking. We start with confirmation bias, and I'm sure that you've all heard about this before. This is where we have objective facts and the facts that we believe, and then what we see is just those things. Those things that only confirm our existing viewpoints. The problem is obviously poor decision making and solutions, that our decision making processes and our solutions will not be as effective. Groups that resist confirmation bias actively for and actively search for possible flaws in decisions and solutions usually make better choices than groups that don't. So weird. So we want to be continually striving to look for things to avoid this confirmation bias. Perpetuation of unwarranted beliefs is the result of confirmation bias, and it has an ally of rationalization of disconfirmation. In other words, that if there is something that disconfirms our existing viewpoint, then we then rationalize it. Give you an example. Santa Claus. Santa Claus is real. Well, no, Santa Claus is not real. But no, that's wrong, because there are movies that have Santa Claus in it. Therefore, Santa Claus is real. But no, this Santa Claus on IMDb, on this Santa Claus movie, it's on IMDb, it says that this person played Santa Claus. It wasn't actually Santa Claus. Then I say, well, no, that's not true, because you know what? Santa Claus is in multiple movies. So therefore, he could be in other movies. And then you say, well, no, I've constructed a wide range of research, and therefore on every single IMDb page it doesn't say that this person's Santa Claus. Then I'm like, well, hold on now. Just because he's not in movies doesn't mean that he doesn't exist. I mean, for example, you know what? Maybe he's busy. Have you thought about that? So it is very, very challenging to that we can consistently rationalize any information away. So it is not that other people have an ability or a willingness, or even it's not even possible for other people to remove our confirmation biases. It is physically impossible for anyone else to remove our confirmation biases. It is instead something that we have to do for ourselves. And those who are unwilling or unable to remove those confirmation biases are doomed to perpetuate these unwarranted beliefs. So, how do we combat this confirmation bias? First, we seek disconfirming information and evidence. We look for information that is going to run against our beliefs so that we are able to moderate these beliefs. Vigorously present disconfirming evidence to the group, and along with this, playing devil's advocate. So, in other words, we have to be sure that we are finding ways to disconfirm these our predispositions or our previously held beliefs so that we are better able to get to the right decisions. And this again speaks to diversity, that when we have diverse perspectives, then it is a lot easier for this disconfirming information to be presented. But even if we aren't a completely diverse group, we can still play the devil's advocate role. We also have fake dichotomies, or either or thinking. A fake or false dichotomy is the tendency to view the world in terms of two opposing possibilities when other possibilities are available, and to describe this as this dichotomy in the language of extremes. I love the dichotomy USA, love it or leave it. Are there other possibilities? 110%. You could stay and not love it, or you could stay and try to change it, or you could leave it and still love it. So there are a lot of other situations that you could engage in. Another example of this, and this one may be a little bit more topical, gun rights. This fake dichotomy between banning all guns and letting all guns be free, that is a very common false dichotomy. There is absolutely middle grounds within that, but it is reflected through the language of extremes. Dichotomous descriptions of events and objects are usually false. Again, they are usually false because most of reality consists of more to less, not either or. There is always a middle ground, and we tend to be in the middle ground. Give you an example, USA, is it capitalist? 100%, but it is more capitalist. There are some social programs that are social or socialist. So we are not one thing or the other. We are always a mix of the two. This also speaks to people that, you are either a good group member or you are a poor group member. Sure, there are people who tend to be more better group members, and there tend to be people who are worse group members. But by focusing on these two extremes, therefore it puts people in labels, and those labels may be and probably are not reflective of the person as a whole. The competent communicator combats the problem of false dichotomies by being suspicious of absolutes. Whenever there is an absolute like that we should be suspicious. And then also employ the language of provisionalism. I think, I feel, I'm not so sure. But this is what I have found. It's that sort of information that removes these false dichotomies so that it is, instead of this is the way that it is, deal with it. Instead, it is, here's what I feel, now what do you feel? And therefore draws us closer to the middle. So we've talked about the ways that mindsets can affect us. Now we're going to get more general into the collective inferential error, or uncritical thinking based in inferences. Inferences are conclusions about the unknown based on what is known. Making inferences is not a problem in and of itself. We make inferences all the time. Guess what? If there is a bush that is rustling, guess what? We do not know if there's anything in there, but we make an inference that there is something in there. We may see someone smile at us. We don't know for sure if the person's friendly, but we make an inference that that person may potentially be friendly. We have a ton of information supporting a claim, but we still don't know for sure that the claim is true, but we make an inference that based on this information that we do know, we can then base a conclusion on what we don't know for sure. Inferences are drawn from a limited and drawn from a limited and faulty information base. However, are uneducated guesses likely to produce inferential errors. So we want to be sure that, number one, that for sure we are getting our information from credible sources. And when we are not, we can very easily fall into the trap of consistently confirming our existing beliefs, falling into this confirmation bias, and therefore leading to uneducated guesses. We will be discussing this further, first with the prevalence of the problem, and just simply that it's a group thing, and that sources of inferential errors, the distortions and correlations associated. The prevalence of the problem is very simple. It happens all of the time, and we make these inferential errors consistently. So we want to be sure that make sure that we have a good information base so that we are less likely to fall into these uneducated guesses. Next, we talk to distortions and correlations. We have unrepresentativeness or distortion of facts. If an unrepresentative example is vivid, then the potential of inferential error is magnified. We tend to glom onto more vivid information than the more mundane. Give you an example. If someone says, if if someone fears flying, a big reason for that may be because of the vivid examples of planes on fire crashing into, fields and killing everyone. That's vivid information. Versus a car crash that happens millions of times, like many times a day. I'm not going to say millions because that's not true, but many times we're more likely to get into a car accident that would inevitably end our lives. And so it's more statistically possible for us to do that than to get into a plane crash. However, it is that vivid effect. The vividness effect is the potential of a single dramatic example sticking in our minds, prompting us to overvalue such an event and undervalue the statistical probabilities of such an event occurring. This is very synonymous not only with planes being safe versus cars being not as safe. Even um, self-driving cars, that's a vivid example of that potentially crashing and killing someone, versus the non-vivid case of someone just driving and doing an error, going to pick something up and then crashing and dying. And this consistently happens. Correlation inferred as causation or covariation. In general, we have, this one's a very common one as well, that we tend to, there's a strong inclination to draw causation, X causes Y, more than from mere correlation. X and Y occur together. A good reflection of this is that dry, hot, and sunny summer weather causes ice cream to melt. It also causes sunburns to occur. But you wouldn't say that ice cream causes a sunburn or a sunburn causes ice cream to melt. Um, so we want to be sure that we are watching for these correlations instead of causations. A good example of this may potentially be that there is a very strong correlation between um, social media use as well as um, generational depression. That our depression has been rising throughout this time, that social media has been occurring. But what's also been occurring is income and wealth inequality has been getting more and more severe. So I'm not going to say what is a correlation or a causation, but that correlations tend to be more common than causations. And we have error correction. How do we improve this ability? First, group discussion promotes higher quality decision making when the following conditions occur. The validity of inferences is carefully examined. So we check our assumptions. Also, inferences are grounded in valid and plentiful information. Guess what? When we have database after database after database after database after database study, all of which confirming the same thing, guess what? It is still an inference. And that is where a lot of people tend to feel that, well, both of these ideas are the same, therefore. That is not true at all. Someone who bases their inferences in high quality information from credible sources is more likely to be successful and come to the right conclusions as someone who bases their inferences based off of faulty or narrow minded sources. So just the act of inferring does not necessarily mean that one inference is the same as another inference. That is not the case at all. At least one member of the group exerts influence to guide the group towards higher quality decisions. That speaks to the benefit of a leader, someone who has more power in the group and therefore guides them to higher quality decisions, will allow the group to succeed over groups that maybe don't have a leader. Now we jump to group polarization, and group polarization is extremely uncritical thinking and is very, very common. We think in politics, and it is true in politics, but it's also true in groups. After hundreds of studies, there is ample evidence that groups sometimes have a conservative shift and sometimes have a risky shift. So we're going to be talking about conservative behavior and risky behavior and how groups tend to polarize towards these extremes. So we're first going to talk about what it is, why it happens, and then how to combat it. First, we talk about what it is. Group polarization is the group tendency to make a decision after discussion that is either more extreme that is more extreme. So either riskier or more cautious than initial preferences of the group members. So in other words, that we may be somewhere in the middle, but we tend to, after discussion, go more towards an extreme of either risky or cautious behavior. Groups tend to polarize decisions making if there is a clear majority leaning one way, so either to risk towards to caution, and that then will be more likely to polarize towards that majority. This group polarization effect has been shown in hundreds of studies across many cultures, so it is not exclusive to our American culture, and groups composed entirely of like-minded members are the most prone to polarize. So, why do groups polarize? Comparison and persuasion are key ways. First, social comparison. So, to see other people in one way and therefore, and see myself in in a different way, and therefore try to conform to that value. One example of this was back in the day in high school, I was doing theater. And in theater, there was a lot of, what's the word? Spontaneity, a lot of risk taking, not in any not in any bad ways, but in ways that we would like be more high energy, we'd be louder, we'd be, doing silly things, we'd be cracking jokes, we'd be constantly engaging in risk behavior versus the more conforming, conservative behavior. So, I saw them as very, very risk taking, very spontaneous and things like that, whereas I didn't see myself like that. So therefore, when after discussing and engaging with them more and more, we started to conform towards the polar extreme of risk taking behavior. Think to your high school friend group. Were they more risky? Were they more cautious? And therefore, did you then polarize towards those extremes? A second primary explanation of a group polarization effect is persuasive argumentation, and this speaks to politics. I'm sure that we have heard many, many arguments from our particular political leanings. And as a result, due to that, we believe more of their side because we've been hearing more from that side. And as a result, we continue to become even more polarized than if we were to get a balanced political media diet. Research also reveals several lesser conditions that can influence risk taking or caution in groups. Culture can also play a role in this. So, some of these lesser conditions for caution, we're more likely to have decisions. This is more likely to happen when decisions are steeped in uncertainty, results could be severe, or probability of successful risk taking is questionable. Whereas, where groups are large, members don't know each other, and members are knowledgeable and well informed of the problem, are more likely to engage in risk taking. So there are a lot of things to consider in regards to these two polar extremes. Now we're going to be talking about how to solve or combat this group polarization. We want to be sure that we're encouraging a wide range of views on issues to be discussed in the group. So we want to enable people to provide dissenting opinions, act as devil's advocate, and discuss issues openly before taking a firm position. In other words, to act as this moderating force. This tends to be a common thread amongst defective decision-making challenges. Lastly, we talk to groupthink. And groupthink is a mode of thinking that people engage in when they are deeply involved in a cohesive in-group, when members' strivings for unanimity or sameness override their motivation to realistically appraise alternative courses of action. A good example of this would be the Challenger space mission. There was big pressure from outside organizations that we need to get this mission up, and there was delay after delay after delay after delay. So what ended up happening was that people were like, there was certain engineer teams who were like, we have to stop this mission. There are people who there's this one challenge, the O-ring specifically, that is defective, and we need to be sure that we were able to fix it. And they self-censored themselves, as well as the organization also censored them in a way that to conform to what was happening so that we were able to be a more cohesive in group. And that was a challenge that then caused defective decision making to occur, and therefore disaster to happen. So we're going to be talking about some of the conditions, how to identify groupthink, and then to prevent groupthink. Some conditions of excessive cohesiveness and concurrence seeking. Cohesiveness and its companion concurrence seeking, which is always seeking approval instead of seeking dissenting opinions, are two general conditions necessary for groupthink to occur. Groupthink is rooted in excessive cohesiveness and a resulting pressure to present a unified front to outside of the group. Now let's think about that for a second. Do we feel like this is something that happens in politics, where there is this presenting a unified front to people outside of the group, thereby removing dissenting opinions? Absolutely. And what can sometimes happen as a result is that defective decision making can occur, and that potentially wrong perceptions of the way that the world is are therefore not accounted for. And how do we identify it? How do we identify this groupthink? An overestimation of the group's power and morality or arrogance, this sort of illusion of invulnerability, or an illusion how we are a moral majority. That can very much be a symptom of groupthink. Some examples of this could potentially be how there was back in colonial times, or during when colonialism ran rampant through the world, there was this belief of the moral high ground and how people were trying to spread morality across the world, and therefore that led to groupthink, and therefore to very, very inhumane and immoral acts to occur. We also have a closed-mindedness, clinging to assumptions. Closed-mindedness is manifested by rationalizations. Speaking again to confirmation bias. How if we are closed-minded and are only accepting information that confirms our existing viewpoints, then what happens is that we are doomed to perpetuate these poorly held beliefs. And also a pressure toward uniformity. presenting a unified front. This pressure can be exhibited by self-censorship. So when you feel like you are censoring yourself, or that you feel that other people are self-censoring, then is a time to potentially try to avoid this. A group does not have to display all of these simple symptoms to experience the poor quality decision making that accompany full-blown groupthink. One or two or all of them can be of reflection, but it doesn't need to be all of them for groupthink to occur. So how do we prevent it? Vigilant decision making requires that several steps be taken. First, members must recognize the problem of groupthink as it begins to manifest itself. So we have to catch it in the early stages. Also, the group must minimize status differences. This means that due to a more flat hierarchical structure, that there is more ability to share dissenting views because the power difference is not diminishing empowerment or someone's voice. And then lastly, develop a group norm that legitimizes disagreement. By doing this, it allows for more disagreement to occur, more perceptions to be challenged, and therefore better solutions to be reached. Assigning one or two members to play devil's advocate is a good way of doing this. Again, speaking to the benefit of the devil's advocate role. And then also institute a dialectical inquiry. This is very similar to the devil's advocate role, but it is a more structured mean of doing this by more people having that active role and then continuing to pursue that role throughout the decision-making process versus just taking the devil's advocate role in certain situations. That concludes defective decision-making. I hope that we all are better able to improve our decision-making. Next, we're going to be talking about ways to make effective choices. Have a wonderful day.